I was working overnight security for a property management company outside Columbus back in 2021, I think. Maybe late 2021. The building I was assigned to had mostly been emptied out for renovations after some company moved offices. 5 floors, big glass lobby, the kind of office building that probably looked expensive at one point. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights I was there alone. Honestly, it was a pretty easy job at first. Quiet building, heat worked, pay wasn't terrible. I'd usually stop at Speedway before work for coffee and spend most of the shift walking patrols or sitting in the lobby watching security cameras that almost never showed anything. It rained constantly that November. Cold rain, too. The parking lot stayed wet all night. There was still old furniture scattered around the building waiting to get removed. Desks, chairs, conference tables. They'd shut off a bunch of lights to save money, so parts of the hallways stayed dim all night. For the first week or two, nothing really happened. Then I started noticing doors locked that shouldn't have been. The first time was on the 4th floor. I used my key card to get through a hallway access door, walked the floor, then came back maybe 15 minutes later. The same door was locked again. At first, I figured maybe the lock was sticking or maintenance had messed with it earlier. Then 2 nights later, it happened again with the 5th floor stairwell door. That one got my attention because maintenance had already told me the inside latch was broken. The door wasn't supposed to lock at all. But around 1 in the morning, I ended up stuck outside the stairwell after already checking it earlier. I stood there swiping my key card a few times, thinking maybe the reader wasn't working right. Eventually, I just wrote it down in the logbook and kept going. After that, other little things started happening. Lights I knew I'd turned on during patrol would be off later when I came back through. Not constantly, just once in a while. Then snacks started disappearing from the vending machine near the break room. That sounds dumb, but it stood out because the machine hadn't been restocked in forever. Same dusty candy bars sitting there for weeks. Then all of a sudden, half the chips were gone. I asked the daytime cleaning lady if she'd used it. She said no. One night around 2:30 or so, I heard a toilet flush on the 4th floor. Just normal bathroom noise. Honestly, I was kind of glad because I figured maybe a contractor was still there and nobody told me. I checked the whole floor and didn't find anybody. But when I walked into the bathroom, one of the stall doors was still moving a little. I waited a few seconds thinking somebody might come out. Nobody did. After that, I stopped spending much time sitting in the lobby between patrols. I started moving through the building quicker, too. The cigarette butts were what finally made me think somebody might actually be inside there at night. There was a conference room on the 3rd floor overlooking the parking lot. Near the end of one shift, I found 3 cigarette butts by the window. Same brand. They still smelled fresh. Nobody should have been smoking in that building. I checked camera footage from earlier that night, but the hallway camera outside the conference room had cut out for maybe 40 minutes. The equipment we used was old and constantly messed up, so that alone didn't prove anything. Still, after that, I kept my flashlight with me the whole time instead of leaving it at the desk. Then came the night I called police. It was raining hard enough that you could hear it against the lobby windows from inside the building. Around 3 in the morning, I was checking an unused office suite on the 2nd floor when I noticed movement through the frosted glass near the back offices. At first, I thought it was just my reflection. Then I saw it again. I unlocked the suite and stepped inside. The lights near the entrance worked, but farther back everything was dark. That's when I noticed blankets piled beside one of the desks. There were bottled waters, fast food bags, and one of those camping lanterns people use during power outages. It looked like somebody had been staying there for a while. I backed into the hallway and radioed dispatch to call police. While I was talking, I heard footsteps somewhere deeper in the office. Fast, but muffled because of the carpet. Not coming toward me exactly. More like somebody moving between offices. I kept my flashlight pointed toward the dark hallway while backing farther out. Then I noticed somebody standing near the elevators. Just some guy in a hoodie and jeans. Probably 30s maybe. Hard to tell in the lighting. He wasn't trying to hide. He just stood there facing my direction while I talked into the radio. Neither of us said anything. After a few seconds, he opened the stairwell door and walked through it. Police got there maybe 10 minutes later and searched the building. They never found him. No car outside either. No broken doors. Nothing. But the blankets and food were still sitting there exactly where I'd seen them. The property company started scheduling a second overnight guard after that, at least for a while. I transferred to another site before Christmas. The part that still bothers me is realizing that guy had probably been inside the building during a lot of my shifts. Maybe every shift. I don't know. I also never figured out how he was getting in and out after hours. As far as I knew, the place stayed locked up completely overnight. I worked overnight security at an outdoor shopping center outside Amarillo for a few years after my divorce. Mostly evening patrols, checking doors, helping employees get to their cars after closing, pretty standard security work. The shopping center was huge. Separate buildings instead of one indoor mall, with long stretches of parking lot between stores. In the summer, the pavement stayed hot half the night. Even close to midnight, it could still be around 90 degrees out. Most nights I worked with another guard named Dennis. Older guy, close to retirement. He'd done security forever and usually acted like nothing was worth getting worked up over. I remember the first night I noticed the truck because I'd eaten leftover barbecue before work and felt sick most of the shift. Around 11, Dennis and I were checking loading areas behind the stores when I saw an older dark green pickup parked near an employee exit behind a clothing store. It wasn't doing anything, engine off, somebody sitting inside. I asked Dennis if he recognized it. He glanced over and shrugged. Probably waiting on somebody. That seemed reasonable enough. But the truck kept showing up after that. Not every night. Just often enough that people started noticing it. Usually around closing time. Usually near employee exits where staff came out after locking up. Then it would disappear whenever police patrols drove through the property. At first, nobody really connected that pattern. One of the theater employees mentioned somebody walking behind her slowly during a smoke break one night. She figured maybe she was overreacting. Then a cashier from another store started asking for escorts to her car because she kept seeing the same truck parked nearby after closing. Dennis still didn't think much of it. People hang out in parking lots, he kept saying. Then one night even he got quieter about it. We were checking service hallways behind the stores around midnight when he stopped outside a locked maintenance door near a shoe store. Look at that. There was fresh cigarette ash right outside the door. Customers weren't supposed to be back there at all unless they walked through loading zones behind the buildings. Dennis crouched down and rubbed some ash between his fingers. Recent. That was pretty much the end of the conversation. He didn't say much the rest of the shift. A few nights later, I found the truck parked behind a furniture store near the loading dock. No headlights on. Couldn't tell if anybody was inside. I mostly drove over to tell whoever it was they couldn't stay back there. But when my headlights hit the windshield, I saw binoculars sitting on the dashboard. Not small ones either. I stood there for a minute wondering if I was making too much out of it. Then I called the plate into dispatch. When I circled back a few minutes later, the truck was gone. After that, employees started bringing it up more often. Mostly younger women working late shifts. One girl from a makeup store said she started waiting inside until security walked her out because the truck would sometimes change rows when employees left the building. Not fast, just moving around slowly. I started paying more attention after that. If employees left together from one side of the property, the truck usually ended up somewhere nearby. If Dennis or I drove toward it, it pulled away pretty quickly. Whoever was driving seemed to know where security was most of the time. The closest thing to an actual confrontation happened near the end of August. A teenage employee from one of the snack places came into the security office before closing and asked if somebody could walk her to her car. She said a man had followed her earlier during her break. Dennis was on the other side of the property dealing with a broken gate arm, so I walked her out myself. She kept looking behind us while we crossed the lot. About halfway to her car, I noticed the green pickup parked between rows with the headlights off. I hadn't seen it sitting there before that. Then the engine started. The truck began rolling toward us slowly without turning its lights on. Not speeding up or anything, just moving straight toward us. I pulled the girl behind a parked SUV and yelled at the driver to stop. The truck kept creeping forward for another few seconds before stopping maybe 30 feet away. I could see the driver through the windshield for a second. Older white guy, thin beard, ball cap. Just staring at us. I radioed dispatch for police while the girl was crying behind me. Then the truck turned hard and accelerated across the lot. It almost clipped one of the concrete dividers near the exit before disappearing onto the frontage road. Police showed up maybe 10 minutes later and took statements. At the time, we still figured it was probably some creep hanging around the property. A few days later, management told us the plates on the truck were stolen. But honestly, that wasn't the part that stayed with me. A couple weeks later, one of the property managers reviewed older footage to help police build a timeline. Turns out that same truck had been showing up near the shopping center for almost a month before anybody started reporting it. Always near employee exits, always around closing time. And most of the time, whenever the truck moved, it happened shortly after security patrols changed locations somewhere else on the property. Meaning the driver either had somebody watching us or had learned our patrol routine really well. Then, about a month later, one of the Amarillo officers stopped by after my shift. He talked privately with management outside for a while. When he left, Dennis came back into the office looking unsettled. I don't really know how else to put it. I asked him what happened. He just said, "Don't work out here alone." I asked what the officer told him. Dennis wouldn't answer. He retired a few months later and never mentioned the truck again. I still don't know if police tied that guy to something else or if Dennis just heard details he didn't want repeated. Either way, I left overnight security not long after that. I worked overnight security at a storage and warehouse property in northern Georgia for maybe 8 months. The place was outside a small town north of Atlanta, near a highway with a bunch of warehouses and empty lots around it. The company rented out storage units, contractor garages, and warehouse space. Most of the buildings were occupied except for Building 8, which had been empty since before I started there. I never got a clear answer why. One manager said the last tenant ran into money problems or something like that. My shift started at 10 p.m. after the office staff left. Once they were gone, I was alone there until morning. This was in February. Pretty cold for Georgia. A lot of freezing rain that month and strong wind most nights. The fence around the property rattled constantly when the weather got bad. Most shifts were the same thing over and over. I drove a white company SUV around checking locks, gates, and motion lights every hour or so. There wasn't much open nearby overnight, so I usually brought food with me. I remember eating microwave spaghetti from a gas station the first night I noticed the radio acting up. At first I figured the radio was just cheap. The company used old handheld radios with dying batteries half the time. Every now and then you'd get static from truckers or construction crews nearby. The weird part was that it mostly happened near Building 8. Almost every time I drove past it, the radio would crackle for a second. No voices at first, just static. Building 8 sat near the back edge of the property beside an old service road nobody really used anymore. Since the building was empty, I usually just checked the outside doors and kept moving. One night I was parked outside doing paperwork when the radio suddenly blasted static loud enough that I pulled it away from my ear. Then it stopped. Maybe 30 seconds later, one of the motion lights on the far side of the building came on. I waited a minute to see if somebody walked out. Nobody did. Wind sometimes set those lights off. So I drove around the building, checked the doors, and left. Then the same thing happened the next night. Static first, then the motion light. Same side of the building, too. I mentioned it to the property manager one morning before leaving. He shrugged and said, "Probably raccoons." Sounded possible to me. A few nights later, I found the side maintenance gate unlatched during patrol. That gate stayed chained because it led toward an old access road behind the warehouses. I locked it again and wrote it down in the report. Then, maybe 2 nights later, it was open again. Still no signs of break-in, nothing missing that anybody knew about. After that, I started checking Building 8 a little more carefully. Around the middle of the month, after a night of heavy rain, I found muddy boot prints behind the warehouse. More than one set, too. That stood out because nobody really had a reason to walk back there. Behind Building 8 was mostly mud and drainage ditch areas with no real vehicle access. The prints led toward the rear loading area and disappeared near the gravel road outside the fence. I took pictures and emailed them to management. Nobody answered. After that, I started hearing more than static through the radio. Not conversations exactly, just random sounds. A cough once. Another night, what sounded like a car door shutting somewhere far away. I still assumed another company nearby was accidentally using the same channel. Then one night I found black tape stuck over one of the security cameras facing the loading dock behind Building 8. Just taped directly over the lens. That was the first thing that really got my attention because somebody had to physically walk up there to do it. I called my supervisor. He asked if I wanted police contacted. I remember telling him, I don't even know what I'd say. He told me to take the tape off and keep documenting stuff. Then, for maybe 4 or 5 nights, nothing happened. No radio interference, no motion lights. I figured whoever had been messing around probably stopped coming around. Then came the freezing rain night. It was around 2:30 the morning. windy enough that I could feel the SUV moving a little while I was parked near the office. I just finished checking the front gate when the radio crackled again. At first it sounded normal. Then I heard somebody say, "Is the guard still driving the white SUV?" I actually looked down at the radio for a second because I thought maybe I heard it wrong. Then another voice answered, "Yeah, he just passed the back fence." Both guys sounded calm, just talking normally, like they'd been watching me for a while. I shut my headlights off and parked beside the office building where the SUV was harder to see. Then I called county dispatch from my phone instead of using the radio. While I waited for deputies, I stayed parked facing Building 8 from across the property. For a few minutes, I didn't see anything. Then flashlight beams started moving through the upper warehouse windows. More than one flashlight. It looked like people carrying stuff back and forth. I stayed where I was. I didn't really want them seeing exactly where I'd parked. A few minutes later, a box truck pulled out slowly from behind Building 8 with its lights still off. I honestly didn't even know there was enough room back there to hide a truck that big. The truck stopped near the rear service road for a few seconds. Then, instead of heading toward the main entrance, it accelerated straight through the maintenance gate. The chain snapped immediately and the gate swung open into the fence. By the time deputies came through the front entrance, the truck was already gone down the service road behind the property. Afterward, police checked several storage units and found multiple break-ins that apparently had been happening for weeks. Mostly expensive contractor tools and equipment people didn't check very often. One deputy walked over with me near Building 8 while another photographed the broken gate. He asked how long I'd been hearing radio interference. I told him maybe 2 or 3 weeks. He looked over at the warehouse for a second and said, "You probably weren't meant to hear that." Then he walked off before I could ask anything else. Nobody ever explained how those guys knew our radio frequency or my patrol route. As far as I know, nobody got arrested while I still worked there. I quit security later that year. It wasn't really the burglary part that stuck with me afterward. It was knowing those guys had probably been sitting somewhere on that property listening to my movements every night while I drove around by myself thinking everything was normal.